Hello there. I hope all of you are doing well today. How is your experience with European poetry? You've had a couple of dates with European poetry in the last two classes, and I gather you have really enjoyed your journey with European poetry. So, in this class, what we are going to do, we are going to continue our journey along the lines of contemporary world poetry by picking up a meeting this time with American poetry. That's why this is a rendezvous, a meeting point with American poetry. Like this disclaimer goes well for this class as well. Remember, in a span of 25-30 minutes, we will not be able to do justice to an entire gamut of American poetry. So, here too, like we have done in European poetry, Indian poetry, we pick up a few writers, a couple of interesting poetry movements that have happened in the literary landscape of America, and then try to introduce as briefly but as significantly as possible at least a few well-known American poets, at least one or two important poetry movements that flowered in the landscape of American literature. All right. Yeah. Before that, before we go deep into American poetry, please remember, I want to read a very small poem. This poem is called America, I Sing You Back by Alison Adderley Hedge. She is a professor of creative writing, and why am I invoking this particular poem? Because recall intertextuality, which we discussed in one of our earlier classes. This poem beautifully demonstrates the spirit of intertextuality and interacts with two of the most brilliant poets of American poetry in an extraordinary way. In fact, it interacts them in a very meaningful way. America, I Sing You Back. Of course, it's an excerpt from a longish poem. America, I sing you back. America, I sing back. Sing back what sung you in. Sing back the moment you cherished breath. Sing you home into yourself and back to reason. In fact, it's it works more like a lullaby. So, the entire poem acts as some kind of mother, and the mother is lulling America back to sleep, and sleep that nurtures the spirit, the sleep that nurtures the body of the baby and all that. And this poem beautifully interacts with two other poems and two other poets that have played a major role in furthering American poetry, which we are going to discuss in subsequent classes. Okay. And the poet says that this poem is an extension of those two poems. We are going to discuss those two poems in a short while. Yeah, we have discussed that poetry in almost all parts of the globe has its origin in oral tradition. That's true for American poetry as well. The Native American poetry also began in the oral tradition, and of course, like its counterparts elsewhere, it was a part of rituals, it was part of a song, it was part of celebration of life. Okay. So, you can say that American literature is born out of this Native American poetry plus English poetry, because you remember these are a result of English exploration and settlements. The entire American literature is a result of English exploration and settlements. Therefore, you also find a lot of resemblance to British poetry here. We will not be going in detail here, but what is important, especially in Native American poetry, is Chief Seattle's speech, which is now acquired an iconic status, for an extraordinary perspective it takes on nature, ecology and the world around. So, very quickly let us take a look at this. In fact, the background is simple. When the government of America wanted to purchase the native land, this is how the chief of the Red Indian tribe seemed to have remarked, he is really puzzled how can he sell his land, because His relationship with land is not one of commercial, which I don't think any American would understand, because their ethos are different. So look at what he says. You ask me to sell the land. How can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. Yet we do not own the freshness of the air or the sparkle of the water. How can you buy them from us? The dead among the white men forget their birthplace when they leave to walk among the stars, because it's believed that in the white mythology, after death, a person finds his or her place in the sky. Whereas in the Red Indian tradition, in this tribal tradition, they don't go anywhere, they return to the earth. That's what the Chief Seattle says here. Our dead never forget this beautiful earth, because she is the red man's mother. We are part of the earth and she is part of us. The scented flowers are our sisters, the horned beasts, the hares, majestic eagles, these are all our brothers. The fields, the warm body of the fallen man, all belong to the same family. So today we come to read. It's not exactly in the traditional sense of poetry, nevertheless it's remarkable. The speech is remarkable for its highly lyrical, imaginative and creative qualities. So this becomes an integral part of Native American literature today. Well, it goes on like that. Please read this. If you ever find some time, please read it at your leisure. So you have again 17th century American poetry, and which includes writings by explorers, settlers and the colonials who took up the pen for utilitarian purposes. Okay, remember, the entire land of America is quite new. It's a settler's land, right? You know that. Therefore, it's still at its early stage. It's true for 18th century American poetry as well. In fact, it's just trying to find its footing. Therefore, you have some experimentations here. Whoever experimented, they were heavily influenced by romantic poetry. Therefore, you find thick shades of romanticism in the poetry of 18th century American literature, in 18th century American poetry. Okay. So from here we come to a major poetry movement that flowered in the soil of America, Transcendentalism. In fact, Transcendentalism finds its best expression in American poetry, whereas the seed of transcendental philosophy is in the essays and philosophical writings of one of the influential critics, one of the influential philosophers called Ralph Waldo Emerson. Especially in his essay called Nature, he articulates the philosophy of transcendentalism and emphasizes it as the true Native American voice. So what does this transcendentalism mean? In fact, in the picture that you see, imagine transcendentalism as a kind of a triad. On the top of the triangle you have God, and here you have man and nature. So transcendentalism is a deep reflection on the engagement of human beings with God on the one hand and nature on the other, or a kind of a trilateral interactions, you can say. So transcendentalism blooms in an interaction between God, human beings and nature, and here it focuses on individualism as such. Okay. And somewhere in the early part of 19th century, something like 1820s and 30s, it begins and goes on till the 60s, roughly speaking. But during this couple of decades, it produced some extraordinary poets, extraordinary philosophers who took this philosophy altogether into a different domain, and some of them even practiced it to the core. Okay. So let's take a quick look at what the philosophy of transcendentalism highlights on. Okay. They have, of course, we can't reduce it. We are not trying to give a reductivistic approach here, but they Transcendentalism talks of the eternal one, which you can call as universal soul. So, as Emerson says, within human being is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related. It's like looking the entire macro within the micro. The entire macro can be seen within the micro. So, human being as a microcosmos, and within human beings an entire world blooms, and once when we start realizing that, then of course our approach towards the world changes. They believed on more than logical reason, more than logic and reason and rationalization. They believed in intuitive thought. They felt that human beings can develop an instinctive feeling and learn many things through that than through conscious reasoning. And the third important tenet of transcendentalism is self-reliance, relying on one's own resources rather than depending on others. At the most, we need to depend on nature to a minimum extent possible, but we have to live a life of self-reliance. Of course, when our Prime Minister talks of Atmanirbhar, you can find some roots of self-reliance even there. Of course, self-reliance itself is a kind of a concept, and you find echoes of Indian Upanishads in that. And Transcendentalists have openly declared their filiation towards Indian philosophy. Therefore, it's an open secret that they are influenced by the grand and egalitarian traditions of Indian Upanishads. Okay. If you want to take a quick look at some of the transcendental writers, here is a beautiful collage of these writers. Beginning with Emerson, you have Henry Thoreau. In fact, Henry David Thoreau took transcendentalism altogether to a new level. He almost gave up his life in the so-called civilized world and went and lived on a pond, near a lake, and completely in nature for many years. He wanted to explore the concept in its practical dimension. And you have very many other writers who explored this. Just take a quick at it, and maybe you can identify some of these writers, and if they interest you, you can explore their writings further. From Transcendentalism, let us come to Walt Whitman. In fact, he embodies the true spirit of Transcendentalism, and that is the reason why another modernist poet, an immigrant or an expatriate poet, Ezra Pound, calls Walt Whitman America's poet. In fact, he even goes on to equate America with Walt Whitman. What a tall statement, right? Walt Whitman is America. So, come to think of it, it's a very tall statement. And that is the reason why he is rightfully called a successor to extraordinary writers such as Homer, Virgil, Dante, Shakespeare, Valmiki, Vyasa, and others. He was a poet, essayist, journalist, and it's even attributed that free verse that is quite popular among the modernists, and even today he is credited to have popularized the type of verse, free verse. As we discussed, his poetic temperament lies in the transition, in the interactions between transcendentalism and realism. It's a kind of a bridge between transcendentalism and realism. That's why he goes on to the extent of saying that in the faces of men and women, I see God. Of course, the tenet of transcendentalism can well be expressed using this. Walt Whitman's poetic genius, flowered in Leaves of Grass, which he seemed to have composed sometime in the 1850s, and to this day it's sometimes called, the Bible of poetic democracy, Leaves of Grass, an extraordinary collection of poetry which celebrates nature, love, friendship, democracy, governance, and including death. This is Walt Whitman, and Walt Whitman during 30s is what you see here. Okay. Yeah, let's take again, let's dip into the poetry of Walt Whitman. I hear America singing. In fact, many consider this as an unofficial national anthem of America. I hear America singing. And in fact, right in the very beginning of this class, you remember I said this particular poem has an intertextual connections with two other poems. This is one of the poems. This is one of the poems. You know, I hear America singing. I hear America singing. The varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his as it should be, blithe and strong. The carpenter singing his as he measures his plank or beam. The mason singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work. Look how, you know, different professions are invoked here, and through this, remember, it's in the 1850s. This is when America is finding the so-called American dream that you and I talk of today, or that contemporary Americans talk of today. It finds its nascent aspiration in this song. And through this song, this is precisely like work is worship. We have heard this phrase, right? So this is, this poem is trying to build the national characteristic feature of the United States of America. So that's the reason why almost all professions are invoked, especially all the subaltern professions, all the working class people are called by their profession, and so as if through singing their own songs, through singing each profession is a song, and together they are constituting a kind of a carol which talks of the American carol, something like that, metaphorically speaking. So there is a woodcutter, there is a shoemaker, there is a boatman, there is a mason, carpenter. All of them come together, and through their worship, through their work, they worship, and through their song they celebrate and create together the dream of America, the American dream that came to be popularized in the 20th century. Okay, I hear America singing. Yeah, from here the transition is towards another very important movement, poetry movement that happened in the literary landscape of the United States of America. If Transcendentalism is one, Harlem Renaissance can be another one. In fact, it's also significant because if Transcendentalism is a philosophical tenet which finds its expressions in various cultural productions, okay, that is of the white people. Harlem Renaissance is a kind of an equivalent for the black people. Okay. Harlem Renaissance, again early part of the 20th century, roughly between 1920 and 40, okay, the early part of the 20th century. It's a socio-cultural and political awakening, an uprising that challenged the white supremacy and reinforced African American identity. In fact, as a socio-political movement that plays a major role in changing the notion of America itself, because most of these African Americans were at the receiving end. They were treated as the second-rate citizens. That's when, and there were police brutalities on the entire community. Systematically, a particular race was getting eliminated psychologically and physically. That's when you have, Harlem riots took place, and out of those riots, major philosophical voices emerged, cultural, expressions emerged, and later they consolidated and resulted in some extraordinary legislation. Therefore, Harlem is basically a district in New York City, where it's a hub where the entire Renaissance took place. And of course, though it began in a local way, the reverberations of the entire movement were felt all across the United States. Okay. Why did this take place? Because of course one reason is to celebrate African American culture through creative arts, because until that point of time African voice was relegated to limbo, African race was almost pushed to the corner. Therefore, it was characterized by a wave of African American writing and of course music that reconceptualized the entire notion of Negro, that tried to help a black citizen find his or her identity, a newfound identity. Trying to break itself free of the Victorian moral standards, it tried to of course downplay the racial supremacy and fought for the equality of all the races. Some of the important voices in this Renaissance are Du Bois and Sandburg, and you have Langston Hughes and others. So, now let us go on to explore one of the major poets who played a major role, who played a very significant role in Harlem Renaissance. This is Langston Hughes. Okay. Langston Hughes, like many of his fellow activists, was a social activist, a novelist, a playwright and a poet. More than anything else, he was an acclaimed leader of the Harlem Renaissance. And it is said that he was greatly influenced by Whitman's poetry. This is also seen in one of his poems. In fact, again in a very intertextual manner, Langston Hughes reconstructs or interacts in a very beautiful way with the poem of Langston Hughes that we just read. So, look how boldly Langston Hughes asserts, "We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame." Look at assertion, look at claim to a new identity without any inhibitions. This becomes evident in his remarkable poem I Too. And now look at this, how this poem interacts with Walt Whitman's poem that we just read a few minutes ago, I Too. I too sing America, right in the very first line the connection is set with the poetry of America, and rightfully of course you can call Langston Hughes as a successor of Walt Whitman's legacy of finding or of establishing human order without any injustice, a kind of equality across the races, across the sexes and across social classes. So, he is a successor to the rich legacy of Walt Whitman. I too sing America, I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they will see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. Now look at the growth here. Yeah, initially, yes, it's true that they pushed this darker brother and they were ashamed of accommodating him or calling him a fellow citizen. Therefore, when somebody came, they pushed the darker brother to the kitchen and said, you eat there. But this guy eats well there and now he has grown stronger. And tomorrow, that's when he says, even when the company comes, I am going to eat at the table. Then nobody dare push me out because I will have grown, I will have grown. And that's why he says, I too am America. So, consider me. I am the darker brother, but I too am America. It's not just those workforces, those workmen that belong to different professions, which basically they are white. So, not just those guys, we too are a part of America. Now, look how beautifully he redraws the identity of America in a very self-effacing way, but in a very affirmative way. We have another very important poem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred. Of course, this talks of Harlem Renaissance. That's why it's called Harlem. It's called Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? So, the dream here is can be a metaphor for the dream of the Harlem Renaissance, wherein they wanted to establish a society free of racial discrimination, where they wanted to create equal opportunities for the black people, where they wanted to treat them on par with the whites, so that's the dream. Unfortunately, that dream was not realized. The Harlem riots took place in the 20s, 30s and 40s, but even in the 50s there is no hope anywhere. So, like it said, dream deferred, postponed. So, he asks this question in a very poignant way: what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? Now look how beautifully. Of course, this poem is a beautiful example for simile. In fact, the entire poem derives its strength on the figure of speech called simile. We have discussed that, right? Look how they are comparing. Does it dry up like a raisin, like a sore, like rotten meat? It's a beautiful poem based on simile. So, a perfect example where simile runs the show. So, he is asking this: what happens to that dream? When you postpone a dream, does it dry up? Or does it fester like a sore, like pus coming out? Does it happen? Or does it stink like a rotten meat? If you don't nurture your dreams, what happens? Or does it become droopy, losing all its juice? Or does it sag like a heavy load? Maybe there is an alternative perspective. If a dream is not realized, it creates a heavy burden on us, because constantly we keep worrying about it, right? That's why it becomes a heavy load. Does it become a heavy load? And finally, before it ends, look at the twist. Or does it explode? Look at the tectonic shift in the voice. Look at because how long can you wait? Your dream, waiting, true, but if you constantly keep on postponing an extraordinary dream, then people also run out of their patience, right? Does it explode? This explosion has reference to the Harlem riots that took place in the 30s and the 40s as well, okay? And this is an important poem, because you find shades of this poem in the extraordinary speech that you will have heard of, that Martin Luther King gave in 1963. I too have a dream. I have a dream. I have a dream. You must have read that speech, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. In fact, if you haven't, and if you want to learn, giving impressive speeches, this is one of the classic examples. Please read that speech and see how powerful the entire speech is, and you find resonances of his poetry in this speech. It's been 1963, more than a decade has passed since Langston Hughes has written that poem, and you find echoes of that poem in this particular speech, a brilliant speech. And this is how, what happens to that hope and vision of a community when you constantly go on putting it off, when you constantly go on because of the lack of the necessary political will, when you go on postponing a community's aspiration, when you go on oppressing a community, then what happens to that collective dream? Well, it just took about a decade. Finally, thanks to the efforts of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, the US government enacts the Civil Rights Act in 1964. A couple of decades later, the US government sees light in the argument of these Harlem Renaissance thinkers and enacts a law, and thereby ensures, at least legally, that there is no discrimination as far as the blacks and the whites are concerned. There is an equal opportunity for everybody. So this is why I say that this is the voice, this is the power of poetry. When poetry sings with such kind of conviction, it has the ability to make a government bend and then listen to it. That's the power of poetry. That's the power of literature. It has the ability to create not just beautiful words, but a series of writers, a series of activists. See, this is, now look at how Walt Whitman's that particular song influenced Langston Hughes, and how Langston Hughes this particular song influenced philosophers and politicians such as Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy, and how an entire government had to listen to the aspirations put forward so eloquently through that poem. All right. So, I hope you have enjoyed American poetry, like you have enjoyed European poetry, like you have enjoyed Indian poetry, like you have enjoyed other poets and their poetry. So, with this we have almost come to an end for for poetry, for discussions on poetry. And if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, more than that, if you wish to respond, even if you wish to let us know how you have enjoyed these classes, please use the official space. You can also use the Facebook forum that we have created for you, and tell us how you have enjoyed this. It would be an extraordinary feedback. So, in the next class, we plan to begin our discussions on fiction, another important form of literature, or an element of literature, fiction. Okay. Until then, take care. Bye bye.